everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for yet another edition of Mentoring Mental Health and Public Health with Tolu Madara here on Amo Gates Radio Communications. Welcome to the month of August. It's such a joy, such a delight, such a pleasure to be continuing this program with you, and we are so grateful for your continued presence, more or less like invisible collaboration with us, because like we always say, we're not doing this for ourselves, we are doing this for nations, we're doing this for organizations, we're doing this for communities, right? So last week we looked at the United Kingdom, we looked at what mentoring and mental health had done, we looked at also at the workplace, right? We try to show that mentoring and mental health is something that needs to be integrated even in the workplace. We looked at what it does for engagement, employee engagement, productivity, even for innovation, when we create a safe place for people to want to innovate, because what mentoring does is that it creates a safe place, right? It creates an environment of safety when people feel mentored, when they feel cared for, when they feel like somebody is watching out for them, somebody that they can share with, somebody that can guide them, somebody that can correct them, all of this in an atmosphere of true concern. Then they are much more willing to explore, to experiment, to innovate, right? And this ultimately adds to the bottom line of the organization. So these are some of the things we looked at. We looked at the UK, some of the examples in the UK specifically, and we also zoomed in on the role of mentoring and mental health in the organization and what it does to build an environment of productivity and ultimately increase profitability and sustainability and greater levels of sustainability. This week, we're still going to continue on the same tone, right? We're still going to continue in the same direction. We want to again revisit what the definition of mentoring is. What exactly is mentoring? So let's look at what a mentor does, right? Now, although generally speaking, there might be slight differences in specific meanings of mentoring, certain things are agreed to be critical components of a mentoring relationship. Mentoring is about support, guidance, and encouragement. I'll say that again. Mentoring is about support, guidance, and encouragement. So I think last week or so we said if a mentor is someone who knows and cares. If the person cares and does not know, he or she does not qualify to be your mentor. He or she at best can be a friend, right? If a mentor also knows but does not care, you might as well describe such a person as a tormentor. Right? So when people know but they do not care, right, they cannot be described as a mentor. But when you have a true mentoring relationship, there are certain critical components, certain crucial requirements that researchers have agreed must be present. One, there must be support. The person must truly care. The person must be watching out for your good. The person must be watching out for the good of the mentee or the protege. Number two, there must be guidance, and that's where the element of knowing comes. If you do not know more than I do in certain critical areas, you cannot guide me. I remember someone once said, I'm your father, right? Father there used metaphorically as in like a mentor. I am your father, F-A-T-H-E-R, because I can see father, F-A-R-T-H-E-R. I'll say that again. I'm your father, F-A-T-H-E-R, because I can see father. So F-A-R-T-H-E-R. So anytime you're talking about mentoring relationships, those are some of the critical elements that researchers have agreed must be present. There must be support. You must truly care. But there also must be guidance. That means you must know what I don't know. You must see what I have not seen. You must have been in places I have not been. You must have gone ahead of me. And that's why, generally speaking, it has been agreed that the mentor tends to be older in age, right, than the protege or the mentee. And the mentor also most likely has an experience, has an experience that the mentee does not yet have. And that's why some say that a mentoring relationship, remember we have already established that mentoring is about relationships, right? Now, a mentoring relationship is like a social connection between a more experienced and typically older mentor and a less experienced protege, right? So a mentoring relationship is like a social connection between a more experienced and typically older mentor and a less experienced mentee, a less experienced protege. So those elements must be there. The mentor should be ahead, should be more experienced, typically older, but definitely more experienced mentor than the protege. And the person must support the person must guide, and the person must also encourage. And this encouragement factor, this is the third critical element that many researchers have agreed characterize mentoring relationship. The first being support, the other being guidance, and the third being encouragement. Now, this encouragement is one that really, really contributes to mental health. Of course, the competence elements, the ability to guide is critical. The care, the ability to support, right, is also important. And the element of encouragement is very, very crucial to mental health. A lot of the mental health challenges that people go through can be minimized or neutralized by the encouragement factor. Many times people just need a dose of hope. I'll say that again. Many, many times people just need a dose of hope. So one of the things you should walk away from every time you engage with your mentor, every time a protege, a mentee engages with his or her mentor, one of the things the person should walk away with is a sense of encouragement. A sense of encouragement, a sense that things can be better, a sense that things will be better. Of course, it's not lame encouragement. It's encouragement grounded in competence and wisdom and experience. I have gone through this path before. I've experienced something similar. If you can do this and do that and avoid this and avoid that, I can guarantee you from my experience that you will come out better. That is the kind of encouragement we're talking about. An encouragement based on competence, based on guidance, based on support. But that element of encouragement must also be there. So if you can support and you can guide, but you don't want to encourage, you might not quite be a mentor. But typically, if you want to support, you would also want to encourage. So I would probably even put support and encouragement as two sides of the same coin, right? And then the guidance. So there must be, that's why I keep talking about the care, the ability to care, and the ability to guide. There must be the competence and there must be the compassion, right? For you to be a true mentor, you must have what it takes to guide that person. You must have what it takes to lead that person. You must have what it takes to show the person the way forward, because you have been in that way already. You have walked that path. And so it's easier to say, follow me, because I've taken this path before. I have a sense of where you're going. I have a sense of what you're going through. I have a sense of this journey. I have been through this journey, and I can simplify your journey. I can accelerate your journey. Last week or so, we said one of the things mentoring does for humanity is that it makes everything more efficient. If every generation needs to repeat the mistakes of previous generations because of the inability to leverage mentoring relationships, then as a whole, humanity is being highly inefficient. The reason why we can build on previous successes is because there have been, prodigies that have been mentored by those that have gone ahead of them. And that way we don't have to start all over again. Humanity does not have to start all over again. Every time we are building on inventions of previous generations, and the role of mentoring in this is something that still needs to be researched. I strongly believe that the reason why we have acceleration in inventions is because there has been one generation through channels like mentoring, organizationally structured mentoring, sometimes nationally provided policies around mentoring in some places. All of these things come together to help ensure that each generation builds on the previous successes or the successes of previous generations, and that way humanity is moving forward in a more efficient manner. We call it intergenerational synergy. Thank you very much for doing this with us. It's very interesting talking about mentoring, mental health, and public health, what this does to public health, and we'll be back shortly. Welcome back. This is still mentoring, mental health, and public health. We are looking at the role of mentoring in mental health and how it impacts public health generally. Now, before we go into mentoring and mental health, I want us to see some of the things that we found out. The research has already clearly indicated about what can happen with public health generally if mental health is not strengthened through mentoring. For instance, unmet mental health needs among youths are a significant public health concern. I'll say that again. Unmet mental health needs among young people are a significant public health concern, and it is a concern that some researchers have already concluded is a crisis. Can you imagine that? Some researchers have already concluded that when we do not meet the mental health needs of young people through things like mentoring, it is not just already a public health concern, but it has already reached a crisis level. That's looking at it and this is as far back as 2013. A research conducted as far back as 2013 was already saying that we are not about, when we see substance abuse, when we see depressive symptoms, when we see high suicide risk and all kinds of things in young people, it is because we are not meeting their mental health needs, and the impact, the outcomes, the effects of this has already reached a crisis level. So that's looking at it at the macro level. Now, looking at it at the meso and micro level, right, at the institutional, so to say, and then individual levels, let's look at some of the indicators from the research, right? We already know that a research was done, for instance, on young people, and they compared young people who had mentors, who had natural mentors, that's less formal mentoring relationships that evolved. They compared these people, they studied them, I think, for about 5 years, and they studied them and compared them with another set of young people who did not have natural mentors for those same 5 years, right? This is called a longitudinal study. So they followed this set of young people, I think about 615 of them. They followed them for this duration, and they found out that having a natural mentor, right, affected the growth trajectory of the health outcomes among the adolescents transitioning into adulthood. In other words, the mental health outcomes of the young people who had these mentors was significantly and positively affected by the presence of a natural mentor in their lives. And they did something that I liked in this research. They controlled for other factors. In other words, they made sure that they took into account the impact of parents, education, impact of economic status, and those other things. And so they made sure that, in other words, they were comparing apples with apples. They made sure that they took, for instance, a set of young people who had same social economic status. If they had two parents, the two sets of young people being compared had two parents. If their parents had a certain level of income, they made sure that the level of income they had was comparable, so that they could now say that indeed it was the mentoring factor that could account for the extra impact in terms of mental health outcomes. So that's what I mean, like they controlled for all the other factors. They made sure that they were comparing young people with the same set of circumstances, parentally, economically, academically, and so on and so forth, so that by the time they compared the mental health outcomes, the only thing that could account for the difference was the presence of a natural mentor in the life of one set of young people and the absence of a natural mentor in the life of the other set of people. And they actually found that those young people who had natural mentors also had an increased advantage. Right? Natural mentors, like I said earlier, natural mentors are mentors that, evolve naturally, not in a formal structure. The formal mentors also have their own advantage, but in this particular study, they found that those with the natural mentors also tend to grow with their natural mentors. In other words, if I'm attracted to somebody, if a relationship evolves naturally, if a mentoring relationship evolves naturally, it tends to last longer than if it's a formal relationship. It's a formal mentoring relationship that is structured and sort of imposed, right? If I'm forced to have this person as my mentor because I'm under this structured program. Now, that does not mean by structured mentoring programs do not have the advantages. They do. But one thing we've been advocating for on this program, I think especially since we began this new program on mentoring mental health and public health, one thing we've been advocating for is that even when designing formal mentoring programs, let's try to leverage natural mentoring relationships. In other words, we can bring potential mentors together with available proteges and see those who connect naturally. I'll say that again. We can bring potential mentors together with waiting mentees, and let's see those who connect naturally. Create an environment for them to engage, to relate, and see those who connect with each other, and allow those ones to now be sort of the structured relationships if need be. In another simple way of saying is allow the mentees to choose their mentors. What about that? And allow the mentors to say yes or no. Those are some of the things we have to put into consideration when designing mentoring programs, because of the impact that natural mentoring relationships, for instance, have been seen to have on mental health outcomes of young people versus formal mentoring relationships. Now, make no mistakes about it. Mentoring relationships are generally effective versus no mentoring relationship. So whether formal mentor or non-formal mentor, when you don't have a mentor at all, it is better to have one, even if it's a formal mentoring relationship. But when you now have the opportunity of having a natural mentor, it tends to be even more effective than a formal mentor. That's what is generally said. Thank you very much for being with us. We'll be back shortly. Welcome back. So still talking about the specific findings, the specific outcomes, right, of this mentoring relationship, this 5-year mentoring relationship on this set of young people they studied, right? So they found out that having a natural mentor was related to less depressive symptoms, right? So the young people were likely to have lower levels of depression, right, and less sexual risk behavior over time. Over that period, when you had one mentor in your life that was there for you over a 5-year period, a natural mentor that both of you had a natural relationship that you're comfortable with, and the mentor can guide, the mentor can support, and the mentor can encourage, what they found out is that the young people in such relationships tended to have less symptoms of depression, and they also had less sexual risk behavior. And by the way, researchers have already found that depression may be a major determinant of suicide risk among male youth, right? So, and for female youth also, they also found out that it also has its impact, right, on them. It's just that the females generally tend not to carry out their suicide their suicide intent, unlike males. That's the dangerous thing. But they also have their suicidal thoughts, but males have been found to tend to carry it out, and that's where toxic masculinity comes in, but we won't go into that today. So generally speaking, when they had a natural mentor, a relationship they're comfortable with, a mentor that could guide, a mentor that could support, a mentor that could encourage, they found that the risks of depression reduced significantly in these young people, which then in turn led to lower levels of suicide risk, for instance, among the males, and suicide thoughts among the females. And that's not the only thing. They also looked at the relationship, researchers also looked at the relationship between social support and depression, right? And they looked at this thing over a period. When I say social support, again, this includes things like mentoring relationships, right? They found out that those who had that social support did not just have a continually decreasing risk of depression. In other words, the rate of depression, the degree of depression they had was continually decreasing. They also realized that those social support resources like mentoring relationships may be more protective for the young people, right? It created a sense of protection for them, especially during times of high stress, and it contributed to more it was likely to have contributed to more positive mental health outcomes. So they looked at it and said, okay, not only did mentoring reduce the risk of depression in these young people, right? They also saw that when they actually faced high-level stress, very stressful situations, they found out that they were likely to handle it more because they felt a sense of protection, that those social relationships like mentor, and this is based on what they call the social support theory, by the way, they found out that those social relationships, those mentoring relationships provided a sense of protection that could be said to be responsible for leading to more positive mental health outcomes. I think we said this last week. Not only does mentoring leave us in a state of neutrality, in other words, mentoring does not just leave us in a state of neutrality. It doesn't just say, okay, we are not worse, but we are not better. No, he actually makes us better mental health wise. And that's why I was talking about the encouragement factor earlier. He releases a dose of hope. It releases, it gives a boost in self-worth. We talked about this last week, self-confidence. So when there are effective mentoring relationships, like natural mentoring relationships, and if formal mentoring relationships, it's not just that the people who have been exposed, who are benefiting from those mentoring relationships, it's not just that they do not have increased levels of depression. It's not just that the levels of depression are decreasing, the levels of hope, right, of mental health positivity, of positive increases in their mental health is also rising. They are also feeling more self-confident. They are also feeling more self-hopeful. I don't even want to talk about the impact of the academic outcomes. They also looked at the impact on the academic. Last week we talked about work life, we talked about innovation. Now we're looking at even the impact on the academic outcomes. They found out that the positive mental health outcomes actually translated into greater levels of productivity in many other dimensions. Why then won't we just do more with mentoring? This is still Tolu Amodara on Amogate Radio Communications, discussing mentoring, mental health, and public health, and we'll be back shortly. Welcome back. I want to look at one or two more dimensions and then we'll begin to wrap up. Now, the first dimension I want to look at is the impact of natural and general mentoring relationships on negative peer influences, right? I'll say that again, the impact of natural mentoring relationships on negative peer influences. So normally, young people can tend to be influenced either positively, but honestly, many times also negatively. But what the research also found is that natural mentoring relationships offset negative peer influences on adolescent problem behaviors. So even if there are likely to be negative peer influences on young people, right? And there are natural mentoring relationships for such young people, the tendency that and this is not just hypothetical, this is research evidence-based, the tendency is that the natural mentoring relationships will neutralize the effect of those negative peer influences. So even if we are, quote and unquote, concerned about the impact of natural of negative peer influences on young people going through a program, going through a leadership. I've always been canvassing for leadership development programs that we need to pipeline young people more intentionally for leadership. And let's say we are taking a community, a local government, a state government, even a national government is taking some people through young people through a leadership development program. If we are concerned that there could be negative peer influences, mentoring relationships can neutralize, can check the effects of such negative peer influences. This is what the research has proven. Leadership development programs, of course, largely should use a lot of mentoring relationships. I don't know why we will have a leadership development program without having a mentoring element to it. I think it's a very critical element. But peradventure, we have coaching elements and not insufficient mentoring relationships imbued into such leadership development programs. It's time to begin to think of how do we build more of mentoring. And you can say, what's the difference between coaching and mentoring? Coaching largely has to do with the job, but mentoring is about all of life. Mentoring is about relationships. Keep saying it, right? So that's one of the two things I wanted to share. I said, take note of the fact that even if there appear to be negative peer influences, mentoring relationships have been shown to be capable of neutralizing the effect of those negative peer influences. When you have a good mentoring relationship, a strong mentoring relationship where, remember those critical components we talked about earlier, the care, the support, the guidance, and the encouragement are present, and the person has that relationship as a protective cover. Oh my God, it is very likely that the negative peer influence can be neutralized. I had to sigh because I've never seen what covers like a mentoring relationship. I can tell you that from experience both ways. I have been covered powerfully by effective mentoring relationships, and by God's grace, I've also been a cover to others through effective mentoring relationships. So it does not matter what the fear is. Once there is an effective mentoring relationship, it can serve as a protective covering that can neutralize the impact of otherwise deadly, when I say deadly, and I mean deadly, and that's the second point I'm making, deadly peer influences. And that brings me to my second point. Another thing that natural mentoring relationships and mentoring relationships have been seen to do is that they found that participants who had natural mentoring relationships were more likely than those who did not have to have favorable psychosocial outcomes. Now, what does this mean? These psychosocial outcomes that were assessed included depression, we've talked about that, risky sexual behavior, we've talked about that. The third one we are here to talk about is substance abuse. Substance abuse is one of the psychosocial outcomes. Young people who had natural mentoring relationships were seen to be less likely to get involved in extreme substance abuse or even at all in substance abuse. And this is probably the note on which we are going to continue next week, because this is a whole topic on its own. What is the effect of natural mentoring relationships on substance abuse at a public health level? What is it at the community health level? What have mentoring relationships, formal and natural mentoring relationships, been seen to do in terms of reducing the threat of substance abuse, drug abuse among young people? Well, just know as we wrap up today that the data clearly indicates that natural mentoring relationships have been seen to minimize the threat, the exposure, and the risk of succumbing to the negative influences of peers that tend to lead to substance abuse. This is not an hypothesis. This is not a hypothesis. This has been evidence proven. This has been proven by evidence. The research has already indicated it. The research has already proven it, that one of the things we can use to minimize the public health threat of substance abuse in several communities in Nigeria, in the United States, in the United Kingdom, in Europe, in other parts of Europe. One of the things that the research has already demonstrated that can minimize this risk and this threat is natural mentoring relationships. And these are some of the things that we need to do more. Government needs to do more to leverage the advantage of mentoring relationships in checking the risk of substance abuse in young people. Well, on this note, we want to call it a day on today's edition of Mentoring Mental Health and Public Health. We hope you have learned one or two things. We enjoy having you with us. This is a very critical issue, mentoring mental health and public health. We've already said that it's been declared as a crisis level issue already. It is a serious issue, right? The mental health outcomes of young people who do not have the advantage of mentoring has already been declared as far back as 2013 by some researchers to be reaching a crisis level. This was pre-pandemic. The pandemic came with the isolation and loneliness epidemic, and it worsened it. So if there is any time to respond with formal mentoring relationships where necessary, with natural mentoring relationships where we can structure them, it is now. We need to use it to check depression. We need to use it to check suicide risk. We need to use it to check substance abuse. And we need to use natural and formal mentoring relationships in as effective and efficient a manner as possible to ensure that we're checking the menace of mental health and all of its negative outcomes, and we are also using it to strengthen public health, not just physically but also mentally. Thank you so much for doing this with us. We look forward to hearing back from you. My name remains Tolu Omodara. This is Amogate Radio Communications, and we would always be grateful to hear back from you. You can send us your feedback on arc@theamogate.org, and you can also reach out to us on any of our social media platforms on LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram, and you can as well send us your WhatsApp messages on +234 810 999 6666. Thank you very much again, and have a wonderful month of August. Take care of yourselves and continue to do your best to understand more and to advocate for mentoring for the sake of mental health in the public. Thank you.